It is time for everyone to watch a horror movie again. Today's story features a found footage film about the moon landing. Apollo 18. The story takes place in outer space, 300,000 kilometers away from Earth. 3 American astronauts just boarded the launcher and arrived near the lunar orbit. All 3 of them are active military personnel. They are Anderson, John, and Nate. The mission takes place in April of 1974. It is also the last launch of a manned spacecraft in the Apollo program. As for why the moon landing program suddenly ended, it is actually inseparable from the perished mysteriously of these 3 astronauts. It is said that they were attacked on the moon by unknown creatures and all perished. After the incident, the American Space Agency quickly sealed off the news. Until 2011, an 83-hour confidential recording was uploaded to a website by a mysterious person. The secret of the sudden termination of the Apollo program was then revealed to the world. This movie is adapted from these recordings. After the 3 astronauts successfully entered lunar orbit, Anderson and Nate, who are in the lander, immediately detach from the main spacecraft and head towards the lunar surface. Next, the 2 of them carry out exploration and collection work. John, on the other hand, pilots the spacecraft in lunar orbit, responsible for communication between the Earth and the Moon, and the return operation after the mission is complete. 2.5 hours later, Nate, who pilots the lander, successfully lands at the Moon's south dial. The 2 astronauts also quickly plant the flag and take photos as a memento. While they are busy installing the signal receiver, a dark shadow suddenly sweeps across the camera. A burst of static follows. The communication equipment experiences a brief short circuit. Anderson and Nate do not take it too seriously since it is only a sudden occurrence. They continue driving the lunar rover towards the crater. This area is scattered with countless moon rocks of various sizes after natural collisions. This is precisely their collection target for this mission. However, during the process, Anderson, who is responsible for photography, does not notice at all that a rock next to them suddenly moves. Just as Nate reports the on-site collection situation to the Department of Defense, Anderson, who is busy photographing nearby, makes a significant discovery. He clearly sees a human footprint appear on the ground. And the further they go, the more footprints appear. Anderson compares it with his own footprint and finds that the pattern and size are completely different from theirs. So the 2 astronauts continue to explore deeper. Eventually, they discover a landing spacecraft inside a super-large crater. Seeing this, Nate and Anderson cannot help but become nervous. But they still drive the lunar rover to the vicinity of this spacecraft. Nate immediately recognizes it as a Soviet spacecraft. The fallen hammer and sickle flag on the ground also proves all of this. At that time, the 2 countries are in an arms race. Logically, it is quite normal for the Soviets to come to the moon. But they do not announce this news to the world. Looking at the fallen flag on the ground, Nate believes something must have happened to them, which is why they do not spread this news. With a curious attitude, Nate boards the Soviet spaceship and opens the hatch. Inside, it is also completely dark. It does not seem like there are any signs of human presence. At that time, the technological levels of both countries are almost the same. The spaceship's operating systems are almost identical. Nate also conveniently activates the power system. He finds that there is plenty of oxygen reserve and the energy is almost full. So where do these Soviets go? Could they have been abducted by moon people? At this moment, Anderson outside suggests they look around to see if they can find anything. Nate also agrees but warns Anderson to be careful. The Soviets are likely nearby. But as soon as he finishes speaking, Nate finds a first aid kit inside the spaceship. And it is covered in a lot of blood, with blood also all over the surrounding area. At the same time, Anderson says he sees something in the volcanic pit. Since the sunlight does not reach inside, he has to go down himself to take a look. Nate warns him not to be so reckless, saying the spacesuit cannot withstand such low temperatures. Under Anderson's trembling gasps, he grits his teeth and reaches the bottom of the volcanic pit. He uses a flashlight to observe his surroundings.
Get out of there. Okay, yeah, all right. I'm heading back up. Holy shit!
Through the flickering light, Anderson sees the Soviet cosmonaut lying on the opposite side. He nearly dies on the spot, and his heavy breathing and Nate's shouts through the radio immediately echo inside his helmet. Soon after, the two men work together to pull the Soviet cosmonaut up. The helmet has a hole, suggesting he was attacked by someone. Anderson searches his body but only finds a rock. He does not understand why the Soviet cosmonaut would keep a broken rock on his body when he dies. Nate tells him not to overthink it and suggests they quickly return to the spaceship to contact their superiors. He says that staying here for one more second might lead to the same fate as the Soviet cosmonaut. After this discovery, the two men no longer laugh and chat as they did before. Afterward, Nate, with a serious expression, truthfully recounts what just happened. He tells the operator on Earth that the Soviets have already landed on the moon and met a tragic fate at the South Pole. The operator, upon hearing this, pretends to be confused with Nate, repeatedly asking questions. Nate states that their landing site is less than 2 miles from the Soviet spacecraft. The Department of Defense cannot possibly be unaware of the truth. He questions the operator about what exactly is happening on the moon. However, the answer Anderson and Nate receive is 2 sentences stating that it is highly classified and cannot be disclosed for now. The two men also begin to speculate that the Department of Defense has definitely deceived them. This mission might not be about collecting moon rocks at all. Their fate could very well be exactly the same as that Soviet who met a tragic fate. Having no other choice, the two men decide to rest temporarily, carrying this anxiety. However, after a few hours of sleep, something happens at the signal station built outside. As something flashes across the camera, the signal once again experiences some interference. Then, inside the cabin, a sleeping Nate wakes up when a mysteriously falling helmet hits him. He quickly gets up. He discovers that a rock has been placed on his helmet at some point. Subsequently, Anderson also notices that the flag planted outside has mysteriously disappeared. Nate quickly contacts John in orbit, telling him that their national flag has been taken by someone, wondering if it is those damned Soviets. However, John states that he has not detected any anomalies on his end. As far as he knows, the Soviets always send only one astronaut on a mission.
But who took the flag? Who killed the other cosmonaut that we found?
At this moment, they finally connect to the Ministry of Defense leader. The leader's explanation for the two is vague. He says the Soviets do have a routine satellite launch mission, but it is conducted secretly. The leader says he learned all of this from the intelligence agency. Out of national security considerations, they did not inform the two astronauts and asks for their understanding. After speaking, the leader also enthusiastically congratulates Nate and the other astronaut, saying their mission is completed ahead of schedule. Now they are bringing them home. But Nate feels very angry after hearing this. He feels he contributes to the nation's future. But in the end, he is betrayed. However, the two of them do not think much about it. They decide to go back and ask the Ministry of Defense for a clear explanation first. Meanwhile, John, who is in orbit, is also ready to rendezvous with Nate and the other astronaut. But as the lander below is about to launch, Anderson suddenly notices an unidentified object moving outside the window. Immediately after, their signal reception device is knocked down by it with a bang. And the launch is also suddenly interrupted. Nate tries to call through the communication device, but they seem to have lost contact with the outside world. The lunar rover parked outside the spacecraft is also overturned by someone. Nate guesses if they were just attacked by a meteor. However, to know all this, he must first go outside the spaceship to take a look. So Nate, despite Anderson's obstruction, puts on a spacesuit and runs outside to repair the communication equipment. But soon, he sees a large number of footprints near the spaceship. Anderson asks if they belong to the Soviets. Nate analyzes the scene and says it is completely impossible for this to be man-made. The footprints are strangely shaped and vary in size, likely evidence of some alien life forms. Afterward, he also discovers a tattered national flag among a pile of rocks. The motion-sensing cameras outside are also gone. However, luckily, their signal-receiving antenna is normal, it is just bent. While Nate carefully repairs the lunar rover, Anderson inside the spaceship suddenly hears Nate yell outside. He yells that there is something in his spacesuit, then thrashes wildly.
It's in my helmet.
Nate, listen to me. Get back to the LEM.
I can't get it out!
There's nothing inside your suit. Now get back to the ship.
It's in my helmet. I can't get it out!
Seeing that Nate has lost control, Anderson quickly gets out to check, only to find that Nate, in his panic, has pulled out his oxygen tube. He lies on the ground, barely alive. Anderson quickly helps Nate up, and the two struggle to return to the spaceship, where they give Nate oxygen, pulling him back from the brink of death. However, Nate is unsure if it is due to a lack of oxygen in his brain. He is completely stunned. He seems to have become mentally impaired. Speaking incoherently, he states that he does not remember what just happened. At this moment, Anderson, who is opposite him, sees some blood dripping from Nate's clothes. Anderson helps him recall that Nate said there was something in his helmet. However, after a search, nothing is found inside Nate's helmet and down jacket. Subsequently, Anderson turns his attention to Nate's abdominal wound. Nate says that he feels the thing is inside there. Anderson tells Nate to bear with it. He takes out a surgical clamp and probes inside. Amidst Nate's screams, he finally pulls the thing out of his wound.
Get it out! I got it. It's coming. Damn it, man! Get it out!
Anderson looks closely. It is the moon rock sample they collected from outside. But how does an ordinary stone get into Nate's stomach? As Anderson confusedly fiddles with it, Nate, without warning, smashes the moon rock, destroying the sample.
God damn, you contaminated the entire ship.
There is no time to blame Nate. They finally hear a signal from Earth. However, the message is one-sided. They can only receive but not respond. Just then, Nate's injuries seem to worsen. The area around the wound starts to worsen, becoming covered with veins resembling blue veins. His eyes also start to become bloodshot, rapidly turning red at a visible speed. While Anderson tries to contact the outside world, Nate, lying on the bed, gradually loses consciousness and starts babbling strange things. Seeing things reach this point, Anderson runs out of options. He thinks if the Department of Defense does not take action soon, they will have to abandon their current spacecraft and climb over to the Soviet spacecraft. While feeling deeply emotional, Anderson suddenly feels a few drops of water on his forehead. At first, he thinks he is crying, but looking up, he discovers Nate is experiencing severe hemorrhaging.
Oh, Jesus. Infection spreading. Oh, God damn it. Must have been the same thing that happened to the Russian.
Nate, listen to me. Why don't you kill me? Nate, it's me. Listen to me. Look at me. It's me, okay? I'm just trying to help you. You're getting worse.
Don't ever touch me.
By late night, observing Nate's expression, he seems to have completely lost self-awareness. He does not sleep at night. Instead, he secretly takes photos next to Anderson with a camera performing various confusing actions. Just then, on the camera opposite them, something resembling a crawling creature suddenly darts across. At this point, Nate is completely deranged. He believes the space agency conducts secret experiments on them. In a fit of rage, he smashes the spaceship's monitoring equipment. Anderson's attempts to stop him are futile. He allows Nate to smash the cabin, causing oxygen to continuously leak out. After making their final communication with the outside world, Anderson and Nate abandon the ship and head to the Soviet launcher's landing site 2 miles away. However, as they are about to reach their destination, Nate believes he has definitely contracted something and fears that if he travels with Anderson he will endanger them. So he leaps from the lunar rover, runs to the volcanic crater, and jumps straight down. Anderson, however, refuses to give up on Nate, because on this desolate, lifeless planet, apart from the cold instruments, his teammate is everything he has. Without a second thought, he jumps down with him. He continuously searches for Nate's figure using his flashlight, but in an instant, he sees all the rocks on the ground come alive and grow legs.
Joyce!
John, Nate's gone! I repeat, Nate is gone!
Suddenly, Anderson is utterly distraught. Terrified, he quickly climbs into the Soviet lunar module. He quickly powers it on and activates all communication devices. Fortunately, after shouting for a while, someone responds to Anderson. However, it is the Soviet command center. With a language barrier, Anderson becomes frantic. Fortunately, based on the information Anderson provides, the Soviets quickly relay the signal. He gets transferred to the United States Department of Defense.
Communicating with the Russians, and they are patching me through to you. We're aware of your condition, and we've made a decision. We can't bring you home.
No, listen to me, please. Listen, Nate, you got a cut on his body. He got infected. There's nothing on me. Please, you have to come get me.
We can't take the risk. We can't bring you back to Earth. We'll let your family know you died a hero.
However, the Department of Defense's response to Anderson is to abandon him. He never expects to be betrayed by the very country he is loyal to. Just as he loses all hope, his receiver picks up a message from John, who is in lunar orbit. This instantly rekindles hope in Anderson, who had just lost it. After learning about their situation below, John resolutely decides to bring Anderson up from the moon. In this moment of life and death, Anderson feels grateful that his teammate has not abandoned him.
I don't mean to rush you, partner, but we are running out of time. Tick-tock.
I got it! I got it, John!
7, 6, 5.
Holy shit!
Open this door, John. Nate, you know I can't do that. Please, you'll kill us both. I can't let you in.
And I'm coming in.
No! Nate, you'll kill us both, please! Please, Nate!
What do you mean?
Stop! Please! Stop! No, Nate, don't do it, please. Please! Jesus Christ!
Nate! Hey! Oh, Christ.
Hey!
If you can launch, you need to do it now.
Fortunately, the Soviet-made spacecraft is of good quality, and after enduring several blows from Nate, it successfully launches into space. Nate is ultimately attacked and killed by the rock-shaped alien creature. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to John. As he is about to dock with Anderson below, he suddenly receives a communication from the Department of Defense. It specifically states that Anderson is already infected, and he must not dock with him. Otherwise, the Department of Defense will cut off all contact with John. However, seeing Anderson's spacecraft so close, John falls into a state of intense internal conflict. Ultimately, he decides to defy orders and receive Anderson below. But he is unaware that inside Anderson's cabin, a large number of terrifying creatures are continuously emerging.
Get above me, John! Get out of here!
Ben, you're coming in too fast. Put an impact, slow it down. Ben!
The story ends with the two spacecraft crashing. The U.S. Department of Defense states that John, Anderson, and Nate, the three astronauts, all lose their lives in an accident during a training mission. Moreover, the bodies of the three astronauts are never found. Finally, the Apollo moon landing program is declared over due to this incident. It is worth noting that the Apollo mission brings back 378 kilograms of lunar rock samples from the moon. Hundreds of these are gifted to VIPs in various countries. The authenticity of the American manned moon landing program still has many people with different opinions. I wonder what you all think about this. Whether the moon landing was real or fake. I would like to conclude my story about astronauts. See you in the next movies.